My name is Josia Tamira Crossley. I'm committed to helping people to access the innate wisdom of their physical and emotional bodies as a doorway to deeper awakening and freedom. I believe that while one-on-one therapy can be profound and life-changing, there are things that can only be healed in the presence of community or group work and with the intention of deeper cultural repair. I have over 20 years of study and experience in working with trauma and grief, and have been facilitating grief ritual and group process work for the past 4 years. My work is grounded in training in somatic therapy, attachment theory, healing sexual trauma, deep nature connection, craniosacral therapy, somato-emotional release, shamanic study, Tibetan Buddhism, and yoga. I have trained with expert grief facilitators, Francis Weller, author of Wild Edge of Sorrow, Randy Jones, author of Medicine Without an Expiry Date, as well as key somatic relational therapy teachers, Mariah Moser, relational somatic therapy, Peter Levine, founder of Somatic Experiencing, Dan Poole-Heller of the DARE work, Irene Lyon of Smart Body, Smart Mind, Elizabeth Claire Burr, my longtime mentor in the craniosacral therapy and Vijnana yoga world, as well as the Eight Shields Institute and John Young. I'm the founder of Through the Dark Woods, Real Life Skills for Navigating Grief and Trauma, a 3-month-long skill-building and process-based group which helps participants find the heart in our common humanity while building resilience and increasing our capacity to be with the harder emotions and the full, beautiful aliveness of being human. You can find out more at www.josiatamiracrossley.com/dark-woods, or sign up for the free intro at www.josiatamiracrossley.com/into-the-ashes. Our next free intro is September 20th, 2021, and both of those links are in the show notes. Today, I'm speaking with Polly Orr, who's the community coordinator for Moss Rock Farm on Salt Spring Island. Moss Rock Farm is a radical permaculture project specializing in living soil food production with the intention of both living and demonstrating how we can, as humans, live in deep harmony with the land and each other in a carbon-neutral lifestyle. All right, so I am here with Polly Orr, who is a farmer and community coordinator at Moss Rock Farm on Salt Spring Island, and also very deeply into permaculture, which they're practicing up on the land there, and a wonderful wordsmith and poet as well. And welcome, Polly.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I got to first experience some of your poetry coming through when you were in the Through the Dark Woods Real Life Skills for Navigating Grief and Trauma group with me, and just witnessing the beauty that was coming through you in that way really blew me away a lot. And then just recently reading some of the things you've been sharing on social media has been really inspiring as well. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today, and just get into it a little bit. Yeah. So I loved what you said earlier, just about what you love about permaculture and how the motto of this permaculture program that you're taking right now is people care, earth care, and fair share. And that you're saying that's been like you your whole life, and just this and that's what I really see that in you, actually, this like part of you that just is like, you're just like so devoted to that. And so, I'm wondering if, to start with, you could talk a little bit about, what drew you to grief work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So grief work is definitely something that came from my personal investigation into who I was, and over the years of trying to develop a deeper and deeper friendship and love with myself, I would have these experiences of places that were numb or that I couldn't quite access yet.
Yeah.
And I slowly started to learn that having a grief process was the missing ingredient for me. It was something that I wasn't equipped with necessarily, but again and again realized that in order to open myself to the entire spectrum of emotions and feelings, that was the gateway, that I actually had to go back and intimately feel all the pain and sorrow that was sitting there, that my body had experienced, but that the rest of my being hadn't.
Yeah.
So it started as a personal journey out of necessity.
Yeah. And such it is for most of us, I would say.
Yeah.
I think it's like not generally something where we're like, yeah, I should just like check out grief.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like,
yeah,
we have to. We get to the point where we have to. Because our soul calls us in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you also being the community coordinator on the land where you are, I remember you talking about just, I wonder if you could say a little bit about just, what was happening on the land that also made you want to kind of deepen into understanding of like how to hold grief a bit more for other people.
Yeah. So through my own personal practice of grief, I started to become more attuned to others' experience of it, and also this general lack of initiation into grief work and into holding this space for this really beautiful and challenging process to occur. So the more I immersed myself into community, the more I saw that other people were suffering because they couldn't actually hold their suffering. And it's not that they didn't want to, because some people are a little bit hesitant about doing this work, but I was really privileged to be in a community where people were really wanting to be in touch with it and very, very open to it. And it really inspired me to want to expand my skills and my capacity to co-create spaces where we could do it together. Because when I was doing this work on my own, it was very profound, but in the Through the Dark Woods series, doing it in a group was completely different. Just the things that came up and the insight from other people and the power of being witnessed, it was completely transformational in an entirely different way. And I wanted that to be an active part of the work and the love that we were sharing together in our community life.
Beautiful. And it's so I think so true that when we can be in a group or a community together and doing the work together, that there's a level of like, even though someone was saying this last night on the call, that it's like there's a place where even though like my grief is different than yours and this other person's different, it's like all different, we can't compare, or even like it's all different, right? But that there's this common humanity that comes through when we can be together in that space, in a a well facilitated space. And I'm really curious about because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like the timing of you stepping into that role in that community was a pretty intense time, because it was also when COVID was like starting basically, right? And then it was like going into winter of that like lockdown. And I'm curious if you want to share just anything about that experience of kind of trying to be in that role and navigating in that way.
So in many, many ways, I've had a very privileged position that I entered into a community just as COVID was beginning. So although there were intense lockdowns, I had my group of 15 of us, and we were still all living together. But there was an increased intensity of fear in the general world. And again, there was this highlighting of this lack of understanding of how people could work through that rather than repressing it or turning away from it or holding it in a way that created more pain ultimately. And I think even if the people in the community weren't as immersed in that world, we all knew people who were, people we really loved, people we really cared about.
Yeah.
And that was really hard for us to see that the world was in so much pain and needing to grieve. And then also another thing that evolved that touched everyone in the community was the Fairy Creek blockades, which was September, October, I think, of last year, where that started getting going. And that was another deep, deep place of grief for so many of us. And to me, they were very related. The way that we're treating our environment is making us so much more susceptible to all of these different things. And I'm not sure that there's a general understanding of that kind of connection. So when people continue to prioritize things like economic gain over having these trees and these ancestors around, it can be very despairing to witness that again and again. And to just want to help people. I think everyone in the community just really wanted to do their part to hold space for what was happening, but it was so big.
It's so big, right? And when it's so big, it's like it can be hard to know like how to hold that or in what way. And and it's like, I think even though not everyone is aware of it, this place that we're in right now globally of being in basically ecological collapse, and yet still the industry is still like trying to just go forward as though it's another day, right? And that's huge, and there's so much grief in that, because we're simultaneously like, no, like stop, right? Like that's not working. But then it's like, my opinion is that the people who are perpetuating that cycle are just carrying like such a huge amount of grief that they can't even stop. They can't even like get curious and touch into those places of like, well, what is driving this inability to stop and consider the greater whole, and consider that actually all life is interconnected and we're not separate from things. And so I just think it's so beautiful what you guys are creating up there, which is a place where there's intention to work in harmony with the land and with the natural cycles, and to regenerate rather than take away from. And so it's awesome. Thank you. And I'm curious about so you already said a little bit about just the transformation that happened for you in the group itself, in the series, the Through the Dark Woods series. I'm curious, like now that you've been through that, and also been through some other really significant things, like being part of the Fairy Creek blockades and this community through COVID and all of this, like how is your relationship to grief different now than it was maybe a year ago? Or
so one of the biggest things that I'm realizing is that I really don't take it lightly how challenging it is to hold space for the reality of the moment that we're in. And it is so deeply traumatic to face ecological collapse and really look at it and be present with it, and also decide that your response will be to act, to do. And I think it's one of the most courageous things that any of us is capable of in this moment. And I used to think that in order to be in that role, to hold both the idealism of what we can create and also the complete reality of what is alive in this moment, that things like grief almost had to be like flushed out or gotten rid of. Completely. Like, you deal with it and then it's done. Right. There's that.
And then you act.
Get
into action.
Exactly. And I really don't believe that anymore. I think some of the greatest work that we can do is to create spaciousness and compassion and strength to hold that with us at every moment. And that the people that I'm the most inspired by that are out on the front lines in many different ways, the grief is alive in them in every moment. They're so tenderhearted. They're so brokenhearted.
Yes.
But it's that awareness of that fuels them, and that gives them so much compassion and willingness to literally dedicate their whole entire life to trying to take even just one step forward in a good way.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful to have that realization now. And Through the Dark Woods was really instrumental in integrating that into me, so that I really, really understood that grief was a gift and an ally in this whole journey.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you. I'm just like getting full body chills through that whole time that you're talking. They're so powerful. And yeah, I mean, that's why I call it Through the Dark Woods, because I think we have this idea that that would be a bad place to go, into the dark woods at night. And so many of our old, even like old European fairy tales, like tell us that, like, don't go out into the woods at night. It's a dangerous place, right? And I think we have those mythologies are in many different cultures, you know, for a reason, to kind of like scare the children, so they like don't actually go out into the woods at night and get eaten by something, right? But I think that that can also kind of embed itself in a deeper place in our psyche, where we not only do we start to fear nature, but we also start to fear those wild, like darker sides of ourselves. And we just want to like, okay, maybe I'll go into the dark woods, but it'll just be about like getting through it, right? Getting to the other side. And you know, my prayer is that just to build more understanding and more capacity in the world for that understanding that you just described, which is that like, actually we're not wanting to get out of the woods. We want to be able to go in and be connected to our wild selves, connected to our true nature, right? We want to be able to be more interconnected with also the natural world, right? Which to me is it's a similar place, right? And inner and outer. And so it's about actually building that capacity in our hearts to be able to hold that grief, hold those painful places, and still be able to breathe into it and step forward, like you said, take that one step forward. And yeah, when you were speaking, it reminded me of being, you know, the power that can come through when we're acting from that place. It's so powerful. I don't know if you were at Fairy Creek when Reuben George from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation came and spoke.
Yes.
But like there is a man who is embodying like full on, like he's like working on the downtown east side with people who are in addiction. He's got family that have, you know, died from addiction. He's like been through all of this, and yet he's like, you can feel that he's feeling that even in the moment when he was speaking and sharing about the, you know, his own emotion around the 215 at that time it was just when the 215 children were found in Kamloops, and it's like that is what's fueling his fire, you know, and that's what's fueling him to have that aliveness and that stepping forward. And you know, like he said, he's been stopping the pipeline for over 10 years now. It's not going forward, and there's magic in that, you know, in that power. So I think you're right. I think like that it is essential, and that actually our gifts, you know, we talked about that in the group as well, that our gifts are intricately tied to that place of grief and our wounding, and to be able to touch into that and have the capacity to be with that, and then really step forward with our gifts instead of just like this place of action that's coming from maybe like our thoughts or ideas of what we should be doing. Yeah. So.
And it's so empowering to have leaders who are embodying that.
Yes.
Because we feel it. So much of our world, we're taught to be very intellectual and to think about things, but just to be in his present, you could feel the liberation. Even at the same time, you could feel that channeling of grief. And I think that's still quite rare for us to be around individuals like that. But as soon as you sense it, it helps you get onto that road of curiosity, so that, you start asking those questions that kind of lead you back into yourself eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And you this is like kind of changing, we're like tangenting a little bit here, but I'm just so curious, and I just loved what you wrote about this. So I'm wondering, is it okay if I ask you a little bit about, you recently changed your pronoun? Yeah, and to they. them.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you just want to share a little bit about that, because I feel like there's a tie in there.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you asked that in this context, because I think my grief work was definitely connected to me being willing to step into this part of myself that I'd been embodying and very comfortable within myself, but hadn't quite let myself be embraced by my community. And in order to get ready for that step, I actually had to grieve all the parts of myself that weren't ready for that moment, and be very tender and compassionate to them, and really listen to why they were afraid and why they weren't ready yet. And very gently, just by holding space for those parts, I was naturally and spontaneously able to see there was actually nothing to fear. And that wasn't even my goal. And with so much of the beauty of grief work is that there's not, for me, in my experience, these really tight intentions or demands or this willing anything to happen. It's really just, how soft can I be? How spacious can I be? How allowing can I be? And just doing that around grief, because it was my grief, was also doing that to me. And this part just kept emerging in me that was so alive and so real for me. And it felt like a celebration in that moment, where I wrote this poem, and it just came to me out of a meditation, and I shared it with my friends on Facebook. And it was some of the celebratory and exciting reasons why taking on the they them pronouns felt so joyous. And it wasn't even really about asking the community to see that way. It was just declaring, I see myself this way. And that in and of itself is so beautiful. And there it is.
And it's a gift, and then it's a gift, right? And I was really moved by what you wrote, and I wonder if maybe we can pull up what you wrote, and so you could share it with people if you want. Because and this is there's like no judgment here at all, but I find often when people are in that place of stepping into that different pronoun or different, or like recognizing the gender they want to embody or whatever, that there can be so much grief in the recognition, right? And that kind of comes forward in the expression of it, if that makes sense, which is, also makes sense, and is like I said, no judgment, is totally fine. And at the same time, it was like so beautiful to just see and feel the amount of self-love that was coming through your expression and your celebration of that. It was really, really profound and such a gift. So thank you for that.
And I definitely wanted to show my community that's an option, because I think there is a lot of fear about what stepping into that, embodying that can mean. And I just want to demonstrate that there can be a euphoria, and it has nothing to do with the reception. It just has to do with what is alive in you, and the way that you love yourself. And the more that you feed into that love, the more nothing else really matters.
Right. And I mean, I think, yes. And, also I just want to name and recognize that, I mean, there is, what happens externally, of course, can affect us and can feel harmful. And I think that a lot of people who are identifying in that spectrum or in that LGBTQ spectrum, that's real too. And that's
absolutely.
And so not to, and I don't hear you negating that either with what you're saying, but just that there's an option for there to be, so much self-love there that almost like that becomes less important. And because I think it's really, it's so key, I mean, in many Indigenous cultures, to my understanding, it was like recognized that people who were who resonated as that, that gender neutrality or that, or both, or whatever it is, that they were the door or the gatekeepers, right? The gatekeepers to the other world. And so people would come to them to ask them to support them in that way, in whatever way that specific gift came through. And I think that's been so lost in our colonized world. And so to see that it's almost like that rainbow bridge just coming through you in that expression. So
yeah.
yeah.
And I appreciate you mentioning that, because I do also want to acknowledge that the way that I've been received in my journey, I feel a lot of privilege, because I've had a lot of support and a lot of loved ones around that are able to accept me. And I absolutely know that that's not everyone's experience. And I think a big drive for me too is that in doing this grief work, I see that community as being one that has so much grief that comes from the lack of support that they can receive from the world. And that's so heartbreaking for me, that I want to be able to reach out and connect to those communities and help them process that. But how could I do that unless I was, owning and claiming that part of myself? So,
yeah, beautiful. Do you want to share your piece?
Sure, yes.
Okay.
They, them. Because language is imperfect. Because it induces solidarity, playfulness, oppression, autonomy, stories, histories, hierarchies, power, and meaning, depending how you use it. And if I have to choose, the most inclusive will always win. They, them. Because I can't actually comprehend myself as a singular human being. My existence has been interdependent. From the very first moment, my biological cosmic soup burst into motion, and this collaborative commotion has been so bound to the choices, lives, and consequence of infinite generations past and present, that it seems deliriously delusional to think of myself as an island. They, them. Because English was constructed as a business language, and in the realms of the interpersonal, it's the artists, mavericks, troublemakers, and earthshakers that must breathe new life into linguistic loopholes of love and leave a legacy of seeing and knowing and feeling instead of controlling, demanding, and telling. They, them. Because life is a mystery. Because we can paint things with thoughts and knowledge, but never understand what makes up the canvas beneath them. They, them. Because envies and sisters and brothers have died without the power to be witnessed as they truly are, and I am privileged and proud to try and make the world a place where this never happens. They, them. Because I am a rainbow. And rainbows don't have genders, or they have all of them, or they dress up and take them off as they please. They, them. My preference, my request, my love language. They, them. A gift from me to you, and you to me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So beautiful. Yeah. So potent, rich. Yeah. Yeah. And I just I think my favorite, well, they're all my favorite lines, but my favorite is I'm a rainbow, and the idea of like being able to dress up and take it on and off, and I do really, I resonate with that, because I think, for myself even, I sometimes love to get like all made up, like really feminine, and then other times I'm like working around the land and like in my work clothes, and like definitely more in that masculine place. And personally, I still identify as a woman, but at the same time, like I get that, to some degree, to some level at least, and it resonates. And I think there's a beauty and a power that comes through your words of like, like I have this choice, and I'm choosing this choice. Yeah. Does that I don't know, how does that land with you when I say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I feel very honored right now to be able to share this. And there are certain times when I write something and I'm called in that moment to write it. And that was one of those times. And I didn't question putting it out there, even though there was a part of me that felt like I personally didn't necessarily need to. It was about me self-witnessing, but I also felt a calling to share it, that there was value in having my community see that moment of recognition. And now to have this opportunity to come on top of that and to have that rippled out even further, I feel very grateful. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Oh yeah, well, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, and I think, I think I just want to also acknowledge, and reflect back to you, what you said earlier of like that place of privilege of it being a choice, because I think it's like that, just to acknowledge that for some people it's not really a choice. It's like this like deep knowing that then is like, oh, like I have to embody that, and in order to be my full self. And yet it's like you said, all the fear and everything that can come up around it. And I just think it's so brave, no matter where it's coming from, to really step into that in this world, in this time. So so thank you also. Yeah. And thank you, all of you, anyone who's listening, who is also, stepping into that and having the courage and embodying that just truth in yourself in whatever way that means, to be living in our most authentic place, because it's not an easy thing to do in the world in this time, to come forward with our real authenticity, with all the layers of trauma and grief that of the parts of ourselves that maybe at some point, either in our ancestral history or in our personal history, weren't welcomed, right? And that's definitely a big part of what I'm trying to bring with this group work as well, the group grief work as well, is to like those parts of ourselves that got outcast and not welcome, to make space and build the capacity and build the skills to be able to welcome that back in. And so I'm just so incredibly moved and humbled and grateful that you partly received that out of doing this work together. So so anything else you want to share to just wrap up?
I guess just a flip side of what you shared as well is that for any of those, no matter what grief you're carrying or working through, or that's coming up for you, if you're not at the courage point yet, the invitation is to try not to judge or blame or shame that place, because even just turning towards and feeling and holding space for the fear or the resistance or the desperation or whatever is coming up in that moment is so much part of the work, and is also such an act of courage. And that the more that we do that, the more we're also showing ourselves love, to not self-abandon in those moments, to still be present to that, is such a beautiful thing too. And that's another wonderful thing that this grief work taught me. There's not this finish line that you cross over and then there's victory, and that's it, that's the good point.
So cool. It's a colonial way of thinking of it.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm gonna get that done.
Dominating. Checked off. I think the more grief work is done, the more awareness that can be cultivated that every single part of it is important, and that all of our emotions are our teachers and our lovers. And the challenges are not proof of failure. They're actually proof that the work is being done. And exactly. That the turning in is being done. So that's been a really beautiful part of this whole journey too. Is just to watch myself be more and more willing, and those around me also to be more and more willing to be those challenging bits too.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, because that's such an important piece. And we talked about that a little bit on the call last night too, just like the value of resistance. And I think we tend to so much like when we feel resistance, we're like, oh, I'm feeling resistance, so I should like push through that and like negate the resistance. Well, but actually resistance is a form of care for ourselves, because we actually don't want to step out into the wild, dark woods without the right support, right? And so I think often it like if we don't have the right, like it's safe enough and the right support, like there's enough support there, it's like our biology almost knows that and can feel that, and that until that is there enough, there will be that resistance there. That's a form of protection for us, right? It's like, no, don't do that thing yet because it's not, you're not ready, or the situation of support isn't there fully enough. And I think also it's like a balance, right? It's like when we can then bring, like you said, bring that compassion. We talk about the four skills of working or navigating grief and trauma, and like the second one is compassion, right? And so when we can bring, like you said, that compassion to even that resistance, then it's like allowing the next step to be revealed naturally. So we might bring compassion, and then compassion shows us, oh yeah, actually, like when I stop making myself wrong and have compassion for myself, that thing that I was about to step into, I see that it's actually not safe enough or not the right thing. Or it might be that compassion, when we step into it and sit with it, that compassion shows us, oh, actually, like this is my old story, this is my trauma story that's telling me that nothing is ever safe enough. But when I really look at what's happening in this moment right now, I can see that actually that is a safe space or a safe container that I could step into and explore that further. So I think that compassionate awareness is such an important skill for navigating our grief and our trauma layers, and it's probably the hardest one.
Yep.
It's probably the hardest one, right? Yeah, because we're not used to practicing that for ourselves. We're used to kind of beating ourselves into things, right? So and I'm curious about like your own journey with self-compassion and like how I don't know how that has shifted for you over time and through the work that we did together. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what the exact wording was. Maybe you could help me, that you would open the sessions with. And it was something like, I release myself from the violence of self-improvement, something like that.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that simple saying shifted a paradigm inside of me and has been something that I continue to feel into, because I recognized inside myself this deep conditioning that to improve and become a better human, it was about identifying, that's wrong, this isn't good enough, you failed here,
right?
and we're going to do better. And there's a much softer and more natural way of going about that process, because change is inevitable, and as humans, of course we're evolving, and of course we want to co-create that process towards the types of change that we want to be in the world. So there's wholesomeness in that. But I really identified when I heard that phrase that the voice I was using inside of myself to direct change was very forceful,
right?
Like violent. Like that word felt like, whoa, like that's an extreme word. And then when I really was being honest, I was like, no, like I have been violent towards myself when I've been demanding these things for myself, when in that specific moment I needed tenderness, and in that one I needed forgiveness, and in that one I just needed comfort. And by acknowledging that, there are also the moments when you become very attuned to like, now it's time to grow. And it's like so very obvious the direction of the growth. You're not pushing it forward in any way. You're just clearing out the debris so that it just can continue flowing nicely in that direction, and that becomes so much more of a enjoyable process. So self-compassion has been a really huge tool to even just be able to witness that part of myself that was being violent, and to start by just being compassionate there, and just not even demanding that part of myself change, just to like see it.
Yes, I see you non-accepting part. I see you judge. And it's gonna be okay. Bringing that compassion in even to those places. Exactly. And it's like that way opens, like with that tenderness, then like you said, that way opens, and it's still, it doesn't mean that there's not also still going to be grief there, as you said, clearing out the debris. It doesn't mean that it's going to be like super easy, you're just going to glide right through into the next thing, right? But it's like there is a natural movement that happens, and yeah, exactly. I love what you said, just about, it's like our soma, our body, our being, and our soul, like just naturally is always changing anyways. So it's kind of like just getting out of our own way. Like stop the like efforting and the like self violence, and that actually comes from one of my teachers, Francis Weller, who's the author of Wild Edge of Sorrow. He talks about dropping the violence of self-improvement, and so that's one of the 4 agreements that we make in stepping into the group together, is that we will drop that violence of self-improvement. And trying to fix things. Beautiful. Okay, well, any last words that you want to leave our audience with today?
Well, I'd just like to take a moment to share my gratitude with you for this work that you're doing, and the real generosity of spirit in which you share it with everybody, because there's been a real demonization of this type of work, and it's so deep, and there's so many layers to it, and there's so many reinforcing systems that keep us from being able to even recognize that we are grieving, or that we need a grief process. And so to have crossed paths with someone who is not only so deeply cultivated that within themselves, but has taken on a mission of sharing that, it's really inspirational. And to everyone who is doing this work, no matter what part of the journey that you're on, whether it's still just individually and you're just, the waves are still just crashing you completely over, all the way to you realizing that maybe this is something that you also want to share with your community. I think that is such an extraordinary path for you to be on, and I also feel grateful for you for turning towards your grief in whatever way you can.
Because it takes a lot of courage, doesn't it? Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for your words. And I'm just also really grateful for you because I couldn't be doing and be offering this work without you and all the wonderful people that join me, that have the courage to join me in it. So, and that in itself is a real gift, to be able to walk one's gift in this world and have them be received. And so some deep appreciation and gratitude for that also. And also for those of you listening out there, thank you for your courage, even just to tap in this small way and listen into our conversation around this. And wishing you the best, and stay tuned. We'll have some more wonderful conversations like this coming. And I'd like to say, may this conversation, may this work benefit all beings everywhere, including ourselves. And may all beings be happy. May all beings be deeply connected to themselves, to each other, to nature. And may we all recognize liberation together. When we learn the skills to walk through the dark woods of grief and trauma, we develop the capacity to hold the fullness of life. If you're struggling with personal grief, loss, or trauma, a sense of emotional overwhelm, numbness, or reactivity, grief or overwhelm around climate change or environmental destruction, if you're feeling like you're carrying the weight of the world, or have an inability to open up to love or relationship after past hurt, Maybe you have unprocessed ancestral grief and trauma, like all of us. Maybe you're struggling with social isolation, loss, or longing for community, village, and connection. Or slow trauma, also known as developmental trauma, lack of healthy family structure and support, complex PTSD, or the impact of past abuse. Systemic racism, gender or sexuality bias, socioeconomic grief or trauma, recent acute grief from a specific loss, such as a death or other loss, caregiver fatigue, you just spend all your time helping others and supporting others, or maybe you've been in an acute situation supporting someone through illness or death. Maybe you're a space holder, a healer, or a caregiver. Maybe you're struggling with long-time deep water grief, which can manifest as depression, burnout, or unexplained strong emotion. Maybe you're struggling with other unnameable grief. Maybe you just recognize the importance of doing this work at this time so you can bring it forward into the world in support of your own process as well as other people. Through the Dark Woods, real life skills for navigating grief and trauma might be just the medicine you need. Our next 3-month-long session starts October 4th, and you can join a free intro session on September 20th from 5 to 7 p.m. I'd love to see you there. You can join the free session at www.josiatamiracrossley.com/into-the-ashes. And you can check out more on my website at www.josiatamiracrossley.com.